What if the entire story of the fallen angels, the Watchers, was never meant to be a love story? What if the image we've come to accept so easily of celestial beings overcome by earthly beauty was only a veil, a softening of something far more calculated, far more dangerous? For centuries, the popular imagination has clung to the idea that these beings were victims of emotion, overwhelmed by longing, moved by desire, and brought low by the fragile condition of love. It's a compelling narrative, it's tragic, it's almost noble. But what if that's not the whole story? The Book of Enoch has become the foundation for this portrayal. It paints the Watchers as divine observers who simply made a mistake, an error of the heart, not of intention. They descended from heaven because they were captivated by the daughters of men. They married them, loved them, and bore children, the Nephilim. This tale has captured countless imaginations, reproduced in viral videos, documentaries, artwork, novels, and even speculative theology. It has become, for many, the definitive version of what happened in Genesis 6, when the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful. But what if we've misunderstood the heart of the event? What if the most circulated version is not the most accurate, but simply the most palatable? What if our sympathies have been placed on those who do not deserve them? Hidden beneath the surface of accepted tradition lies another text, forgotten by most, ignored by many, and preserved only in fragments and in silence. That text is the Book of Jubilees, and in it, the Watchers are not helpless romantics. They are conspirators. They are not victims of passion. They are violators of sacred order. Unlike Enoch, Jubilees does not stir the emotions. It doesn't build a tragic arc. Instead, it presents a stark contrast. The Watchers, according to Jubilees, did not fall by accident. They descended with intent to teach forbidden knowledge, to disrupt holy cycles, to pass on secrets before their time, and to dismantle the rhythm of the covenant established from the beginning. They didn't love. They broke. They interfered. They rebelled. And if this version is closer to the truth, then what does it say about us, that we have for generations embraced the softer story? That we have felt compassion toward the ones who shattered the divine structure? Could it be that our emotional response has blinded us to the deeper theological violation? The truth is not always the loudest voice. Sometimes it is the voice that was buried because it was too clear. Jubilees is not a poetic vision. It is a theological correction. And that alone may explain why it was left out, why it was set aside, not because it was wrong, but because it was too direct, too exposing, too unyielding. Why then has the love story version prevailed? Why have millions accepted the narrative of angels who simply fell in love, while ignoring the possibility that this was no romantic slip, but a structured revolt? The answer lies not only in theology, but in human psychology. We are drawn to stories of emotion, to tales of fallible beings who resemble us. But when faced with a narrative that strips away all softness, that speaks not of hearts but of intent, we hesitate, we resist. We turn back to the version that comforts rather than convicts. And yet, this contrast reveals more than just two different accounts. It exposes a deeper question. Have we, without realizing it, defended a betrayal? Have we embraced the ones who dismantled holiness because their story was told with better lighting? This is not a call to reject Enoch. It is a call to open a long-buried book and ask the questions no one taught us to ask. Why was the order of time disrupted? Why was sacred rhythm tampered with? And why has that version of the story remained in the shadows? If Enoch is the veil, woven with tragedy and awe, then Jubilees is the mirror, cold, still, unforgiving. But in that mirror, we may finally begin to see the truth about the Watchers, not as misunderstood lovers, but as architects of a rupture still echoing through the rhythm of our world. And that difference changes everything. Two accounts, one event. And yet, they could not be more different. The Book of Enoch and the Book of Jubilees both tell the story of the Watchers, the celestial beings who descended to earth. But the way they tell it, the lens through which each narrative is shaped, reveals a contrast so stark that it forces us to re-examine not just what we know, but how we've come to know it. One version moves the heart, the other unsettles the soul. One offers tragedy, the other delivers indictment. Enoch reads like a divine drama. It speaks to the emotions of beauty beheld, of longing awakened, of boundaries crossed not in malice but in weakness. The Watchers fall, not because they intend evil, but because they are captivated by what they were never meant to touch. They love, they take wives, and from that union come the Nephilim. It is a story that echoes human frailty, a celestial mirror of our own failings. And because of that, we understand them, we relate to them, we even pity them. But Jubilees offers no such sympathy. In this text, the Watchers are not described as overcome by desire or seduced by beauty. They are portrayed as knowing, deliberate, and coordinated. They descend with purpose, to disrupt, to teach what should remain hidden, to reorder what was sacred. There is no romance in this version. There is only strategy. What Enoch paints as a heartbreak, Jubilees exposes as a plan. A covenant-breaking pact sealed among heavenly beings with full awareness of what they were about to do. The literary tone itself reflects this divide. Enoch is filled with imagery, visions of heavenly places, cinematic sequences, poetic laments. It evokes awe, wonder, and sorrow. Jubilees, on the other hand, is clinical, sparse, methodical. It is not written to impress the imagination, but to lay down a record, a structure, a legal document of sorts, mapping out not just what happened, but why it matters and what exactly was broken. This difference isn't just stylistic, it's theological, because when you feel for the Watchers, as Enoch often allows, you are less inclined to examine the structure they dismantled. But when you read Jubilees, that feeling is removed. You are left with the stark reality of beings who intentionally undermined the sacred rhythm of the world, not out of emotion, but out of design. One story makes you cry, the other makes you pause. One makes you wonder, the other makes you ask, how much of our spiritual framework is built on the more comforting version? This leads to a deeper cultural question. Why has the story of Enoch resonated so powerfully across time and tradition, while Jubilees remains mostly unread? Perhaps because Enoch tells a tale that can be visualized, dramatized, and mythologized. It fits into art, into film, into sermons about mercy and grace. Jubilees does not fit into those categories. It cannot be easily dramatized. It cannot be softened. It does not tug at the heart. It speaks instead to the soul, and not with comfort, but with precision. And here lies the most disorienting realization. Both accounts might hold parts of the truth. Enoch may describe the external, what the watchers felt, what they did. Jubilees may reveal the internal, why they did it, and what it cost. If so, then only by holding both side by side can we begin to see the full picture. But if we only choose the version that makes us feel, we risk ignoring the one that was meant to make us aware. This contrast invites not only theological curiosity, but a necessary discomfort. It calls us to ask, have we misunderstood sin as weakness when it was in fact rebellion? Have we preferred stories that explain us rather than stories that expose us? And if so, what else might we have misread by focusing on emotion instead of order? To go further, we must compare more than just the two texts. We must compare the cultures that preserved them. Why did Enoch survive in apocryphal imagination while Jubilees was buried in silence? Why was one quoted, shared, and mythologized while the other was excluded from the canon? The answer may reveal more about us than about the texts themselves, because we remember what comforts us, but we often forget what confronts us. Perhaps that's why this comparison matters now more than ever, not to pit one book against the other, but to restore what was lost in the choosing. Jubilees does not negate Enoch, but it changes the ground on which we stand. It reframes the meaning of the fall. It reframes the nature of the watchers. And most of all, it reframes our understanding of what was truly violated. Not love, not lust, but sacred structure. And when we realize that, when we truly see what each book reveals and what each one omits, we no longer ask which story is right. We begin to see that both were never meant to stand alone. When placed together, they expose a depth that no single narrative could reveal. And in that depth, we may finally begin to uncover what was really stolen. Not just a moment in time, but the entire framework of holy rhythm. A rhythm that once broken left a wound in the soul of the world still bleeding in silence. Jubilees was never written to entertain. It does not move like a story. It does not invite the imagination to soar. It was written to preserve, painstakingly, faithfully, with the tone of one tasked not with inspiring wonder, but with maintaining order. When people hear about books excluded from the Bible, they often imagine forbidden visions, cosmic battles, cryptic prophecies, or ancient mysteries locked behind symbolic language. And while some of these lost texts lean into that mystery, Jubilees stands apart. It offers no radiant heavens, no surreal journeys through layered realms, no visions wrapped in metaphor. Instead, it offers a calendar, a law, a sequence. Jubilees is not a prophetic trance, it is a dictated record. According to Ethiopian tradition, the entire book was spoken to Moses by a divine messenger during his 40 days on Mount Sinai, not after the law, but as part of the law. It's not a reflection of Moses' imagination, nor a supplement to what he saw. It is a theological system, revealing the sacred structure not only of commandment, but of time itself. From the very beginning, it insists the covenant was not new. It was always there. It was only being remembered. In this book, Adam is shown keeping the Sabbath, not because he was told, but because the rhythm was already inscribed in creation. Abel does not make a random offering. He gives it at the appointed time. Noah knows the difference between clean and unclean animals before the flood. Abraham doesn't discover the feasts. He teaches them to his children before Moses ever climbs the mountain. None of them were inventors of holiness. They were keepers of memory. And Jubilees records their lives not to elevate them, but to restore the rhythm they followed. This is what separates Jubilees from texts like Enoch. Enoch makes you marvel. It lifts you into a world of wonder, of cosmic tragedy, of spiritual warfare with poetic weight. Jubilees makes you pause. It does not rush you toward awe. It brings you to stillness. Because in its quiet, deliberate recording of time, of festivals, of seasons, of sacred order, it does something that other books do not. It insists that holiness is not found in the extraordinary, but in the consistent return to what was ordained from the beginning. That's why it doesn't inspire cinematic retellings or viral fascination. It's too precise, too dry for drama, too structured for sensation. But in that exactness lies its sacred power. Jubilees doesn't try to move you emotionally. It doesn't dramatize rebellion or romance. It simply asks, have you remembered what was set at the foundation? Have you lived by it, not in name, but in rhythm? It is in this that the book becomes unsettling, because its logic is too tight to ignore, too clear to dismiss. It leaves no room for interpretation when it comes to time, to practice, to alignment. And that is where its challenge lies, not in what it claims about angels or giants, but in what it demands of the reader's life. Perhaps you haven't sinned by intent. Perhaps your heart is sincere. But if you are off rhythm, if the days are kept wrong, if the feasts are misaligned, if your Sabbath does not fall where light began, then maybe, without knowing it, you've been walking faithfully, out of step. Jubilees doesn't accuse, it reveals, not through warning, but through alignment. It does not shout, it does not plead, it simply holds up the framework and waits. And if you stop long enough to measure your days against it, you may find that the issue isn't disbelief, it's misremembering. That's why it's not popular. That's why it was forgotten. Because it doesn't make you feel something. It makes you stop. And stopping, that sacred interruption of momentum, is perhaps the holiest experience modern life has lost. Jubilees gives it back, not with emotion, but with a system. A way to see that perhaps your soul was never off course in intention, only in timing. And if that's true, then maybe you don't need to repent of rebellion. Maybe you only need to remember the rhythm. Because sacredness, in the world of Jubilees, isn't born from passion, it's born from precision. And what's been lost is not belief, but alignment. Not conviction, but calendar. Not love, but the right time to express it. Your calendar might not be wrong by the clock, but it could be misaligned in spirit. Jubilees does not unfold like a vision or a parable. It is structured with the precision of a divine timepiece. The year consists of 364 days, 4 seasons. Each season lasts 91 days. Every week holds 7 days. And the 4th day, the day when God created light, is not just a poetic moment. It is the anchor, the calibration point for all sacred cycles. This is not a minor detail tucked into an obscure section. This is the spine of the covenant itself. Because in the world of Jubilees, worship is not an emotional impulse. It is a response to rhythm, a sacred choreography that depends on exact timing. Every feast, from Passover to the Feast of Weeks, is scheduled. Every offering, every rest day, every sacred assembly is woven into a fabric of days. And when even a single thread is pulled out of place, the entire garment begins to unravel. If your celebration lands on the wrong day, it is not merely off, it is hollow. If the harvest prayer is made in the wrong season, it doesn't echo in heaven, it disappears into a void. Jubilees is not just preserving a timeline, it is drawing the architecture of a spiritual ecosystem where every movement of earth and sky is calibrated with the worship of God. A missed day is not an inconvenience, it is a rupture. A skipped cycle is not a delay, it is a missed heartbeat in the body of the covenant. And this leads to the most piercing question the text quietly places before us. If you are keeping the feasts, but not on their appointed days, what exactly are you keeping? If you rest when heaven has not called rest, if you shout praise when the rhythm is offbeat, have you entered into communion? Or just rehearsal? Jubilees doesn't shout this accusation, it doesn't confront with thunder, but its silence grows louder the longer you sit with it, because what it reveals is chilling. You might be faithful, you might be sincere, you might be devout, but if your time is wrong, everything else might be too, not because of rebellion, but because of forgetfulness. And that forgetfulness may not even be yours. It may be inherited from centuries of slowly shifting days, restructured calendars, lost reckoning. The most terrifying part of Jubilees is not its rules. It is its suggestion that the entire world might have veered off course without knowing it. That worship may have been taking place faithfully, but out of sync. That what began as memory became repetition, that what was once a holy rhythm is now only ritual echoing in an empty chamber, and worst of all, that we no longer know what we forgot. This is why Jubilees is not popular. It doesn't dazzle. It doesn't inspire debate about angels or giants. It doesn't stir curiosity with apocalyptic images. It simply presents a calendar, but in doing so, it opens a chasm. Because if this calendar is right, then most others are wrong. If this rhythm is true, then many practices, no matter how ancient, are offbeat. It begs for a deeper investigation. What happened to the 364-day year? Why was it changed? Who changed it? Did it drift through error, or was it reshaped intentionally? A deep dive into this question exposes uncomfortable terrain, because it leads into texts, traditions, and decisions that shape the religious world as we know it. And more unsettling is the fact that the angel did not deliver this information to the whole nation, but to one man. Why? Why keep this knowledge veiled, embedded in a book hidden for centuries? These questions do not fit neatly into doctrine. They don't resolve with a simple answer, but they challenge us in the most foundational way. Because if you lose track of time, you lose track of alignment. You may still carry the symbols, but the power behind them, rooted in divine timing, is gone. Jubilees doesn't warn with fire, it warns with stillness. It doesn't declare war, it declares silence. And in that silence, perhaps the entire world has already drifted, not through defiance, but through neglect. Through layers of inherited assumptions, through calendars rewritten by kingdoms and councils, through rhythms once sacred, now forgotten. And so the question lingers, not in fear, but in sobering clarity. Are we keeping the covenant, or are we simply reenacting the memory of something we no longer live? Because if Jubilees is right, then the true theft was not knowledge, not worship, not belief, but time itself. It wasn't the blood, it wasn't the lust, it wasn't the giants. The deepest sin of the Watchers, according to Jubilees, was something far more subtle. They altered the rhythm. In our common imagination, the Watchers fell because they broke divine boundaries. They loved what should not be loved. They took what should not be taken. Their union with human women produced beings of chaos, the Nephilim, giants that devoured the earth. That is the version made vivid in Enoch. It's the story that grips the heart and stirs the drama of heaven's sorrow and wrath. But Jubilees lowers the light and reveals another dimension. It does not deny their transgression, but it reframes it. It presses deeper to a quieter, colder violation. They disrupted the sacred timing of the world, not with fire, not with swords, but with calendars, with seasons, with cycles. They tilted the order of things just enough to derail what had been perfectly aligned. They taught humanity not merely forbidden knowledge, but forbidden timing. And in the shifting of time, the Watchers achieved something no act of violence could. They caused the world to move out of sync with heaven without even knowing it. It wasn't an obvious war. It was a corruption of rhythm. Jubilees suggests the Watchers introduced alternate ways of measuring the stars, not to draw closer to the covenantal calendar, but to counterfeit it. They gave humanity tools of observation, but with the purpose of creating a parallel system, one that mimicked the divine rhythm but did not match it. A rhythm close enough to feel holy, but not close enough to be sanctified. The real danger then was not in what they taught, but when. Truth delivered at the wrong time is no longer truth. It becomes distortion. Light given before it is meant to shine becomes a false dawn. In Jubilees, the Watchers introduced this premature light not to enlighten, but to obscure. They reprogrammed the seasons, they shifted the weeks, they moved the markers, and in doing so, they created a new rhythm, one that kept people singing, praying, sacrificing, all while standing outside the frequency of the covenant. This is the heart of the indictment. Not that the people stopped worshipping, but that their worship continued, misaligned. In Jubilees, time is not a background to holiness. It is the structure that makes holiness possible. The sacred calendar is not a human invention, but a reflection of the day God created light, the fourth day, the foundation for every subsequent week, every feast, every sabbatical year. Everything revolves around this cosmic rhythm, and it is this that the Watchers fractured. When time is broken, even faithful acts become echoes without substance. You can observe the festival, but if it's the wrong day, you're dancing to a song heaven is not playing. You can keep the Sabbath, but if it's not aligned with the light that once marked the first Sabbath, your rest becomes just another pause. The tragedy, according to Jubilees, is that the people don't stop. They go on, unaware. They believe they are in the covenant because they feel sincere. But sincerity in a distorted rhythm only deepens the separation. It is here that the weight of the Watchers' sin becomes clear. They didn't need to teach destruction. All they had to do was shift the timing, move it just enough that everything would continue, but off-axis. Because holiness, in the language of Jubilees, is not merely about intention, it is about alignment. It is not just what you do, it is when you do it. A single day's drift, a single feast misplotted, is not a small error. It is a tear in the fabric of covenantal time. This is the warning Jubilees whispers through its quiet pages, not in judgmental tones, but in the stillness that follows misalignment. You can still sing the right lyrics, but if your tempo is off, the music dies. You can still kneel in prayer, but if your posture doesn't match the rhythm set at creation, your words vanish into a silence you can't hear. And that is the most haunting truth of all. The world may have drifted, and no one noticed. Not because they stopped believing, but because they stopped listening to the beat beneath belief. There was no explosion, no curse thundering across the skies. The aftermath of the Watchers did not arrive as catastrophe, but as continuity. That is what made it terrifying. Humanity didn't stop worshipping. They didn't abandon belief. They didn't forsake the altar. But everything began to operate within a framework that was no longer true. They carried out the rituals. They recited the prayers. They kept the festivals. But the rhythm, the unseen pulse that made it all living, was gone. They were still playing the notes, but the melody had vanished. Jubilees does not describe a collapse. It describes a drift, a fracture, not in morality, but in time. The Watchers introduced a shift so subtle it didn't shatter the system. It replaced it, not with chaos, but with a perfect counterfeit. So perfect, in fact, that people continue to serve God faithfully, within a rhythm that no longer aligned with His. The seasons rolled on. The calendars kept turning, the sacrifices continued, but the divine appointment had been missed, and the world spun forward, further and further from its sacred axis. This is what makes their sin unspeakably deep. They didn't need to silence worship, they only needed to move it, shift it slightly, delay a day here, advance a week there, change a season. Eventually, everything is still happening, but no longer in tune. It's like a singer whose voice is pure, whose passion is real, but who sings one measure off. The congregation might not notice, the priest might not feel it, but in heaven, the note is no longer answered. Jubilees frames this not as an accident, but as a wound, a breach in cosmic alignment, not visible, not audible, but profoundly present, like a cracked gear in a watch. It still ticks, still turns, but now it tells the wrong hour. And if time is off, then the rendezvous is missed. You might kneel in prayer, but He's not there, not because He withdrew, but because you arrived at the wrong moment. This is where the silence becomes deafening, because the rituals don't stop. The religion continues, but over generations the presence fades. The prayers feel thinner, the symbols grow heavier, the fire on the altar flickers, then fades, but no one knows when it happened. No one remembers what it felt like to be truly in sync, and so they assume this is how it has always been. The real tragedy isn't rebellion, it's the normalization of dissonance. The people have not rejected God, they have simply lost their meeting place in time. They think He is late, or silent, or distant. But perhaps He is none of those. Perhaps He arrived exactly when He always did, and found no one there. Because the calendar had been moved, because the day had been changed, because the signal was never heard. This opens a haunting theological question. Can someone be sincere, devout, even obedient, yet unknowingly live outside the covenant, simply because they're following the wrong rhythm? Can faith, cut off from divine timing, become a loop with no answer? A ritual without resonance? A voice that echoes into emptiness, not from lack of faith, but from missed appointment? What if this is not hypothetical? What if humanity has been living out of sync for millennia? What if the long silence we often associate with divine absence isn't absence at all, but misalignment? What if the reason we don't hear Him isn't because He stopped speaking, but because we stopped listening on the right day? In that world, the covenant is not torn, it is hollowed, The structure remains, but the breath of life within it slowly thins, until religion becomes memory, until tradition becomes machinery, until holiness becomes repetition. And by the time we notice something is wrong, we no longer remember what right ever felt like. That is the quiet horror of the Watcher's sin. Not the violence, not the lust, but the recalibration of sacred time. Because once the rhythm is broken, even devotion becomes a ghost, a well-meaning echo that never reaches its source, a faithful gesture answered by silence. So their greatest offense was not in whom they loved, it was in what they rewrote, a single corrupted calendar. And from that one shift, everything else, however sincere, became a voice calling out to no reply. They did not shatter the heavens or storm the gates. The Nephilim came quietly. They came after the rhythm was already broken, after the sacred pulse had slipped off beat and no one noticed. Jubilees does not present them as the catalyst, but as the consequence. They are not the source of decay, they are its proof. The Nephilim were born not simply from forbidden unions, but from a world already misaligned. A world where time had been distorted, where sacred seasons no longer matched the divine calendar. In that world, even miracles go rogue. Even power, once rooted in purpose, becomes monstrous. The Nephilim are what happens when the spiritual immune system collapses. They are the visible sign of an invisible sickness. Jubilees makes no effort to sensationalize them. It doesn't linger on their size or might. Instead, it leaves them standing in the background, silent monuments to what has already been lost. They are not judged for what they did. Their very existence is the judgment. The world was already adrift. They just filled the vacuum. And that's the horror. The Nephilim didn't destroy the sacred rhythm. They were born because it had already been destroyed. Like weeds in a field where the gardener never returned. Like echoes in a sanctuary where the song has stopped. They are not chaos invading order. They are order decayed into something unrecognizable. And by the time they appear, it is already too late. This is what makes them terrifying. They are symptoms, not cause. They are what happens when a society continues to function, to worship, to organize, long after the spirit that gave it life has departed. They are the incarnations of a faith that still has rituals, but no resonance, structures, but no soul, intentions, but no alignment. In that sense, the Nephilim are not confined to ancient texts or antediluvian myth. They may be walking among us even now, not as giants in flesh, but as systems, ideologies, and habits that thrive in the absence of sacred rhythm. Things that look impressive, that seem powerful, but are born of disconnection, of a covenant remembered only as tradition, of truth repeated without understanding. And the most unsettling part? We may not recognize them. Because when misalignment becomes normalized, when the rhythm has been off for long enough, even the monstrous can be welcomed. We romanticize them. We write novels and scripts about their strength. We marvel at their mystery. We soften their sin until it becomes myth. And then we celebrate what once was a warning. That is the quiet tragedy. The Nephilim were never the climax. They were the shadow cast by a deeper loss. Their birth was not a thunderclap. It was a whisper, signaling that the alignment had broken, that the dance had lost its tempo, that the holy had been hollowed. And now we must ask, what are the Nephilim of our time? What power, what institution, what cultural marvel is rising from a soil long stripped of its sacred timing? It is a theological question with no easy answer. When something grows large in a misaligned world, is it blessed or bloated? When a voice carries far, but not in harmony with the covenantal beat, is it prophetic or parasitic? When something flourishes outside the garden, is it a sign of strength or a sign the gates have been left open too long? We may not need the Nephilim to return in form, because their spirit is already here, in every system that functions without alignment, in every success celebrated despite disconnection, in every sacred act performed without rhythm. That is where they live now, in the normalization of the offbeat, in the applause given to the unanchored, in the quiet acceptance that this is just how things are. And that, more than anything, is the most terrifying sign of all. He was not lifted because he conquered the heavens. He was not taken because he unveiled divine secrets or crossed the thresholds of otherworldly realms. He was taken because he remembered. Because in a world that had already begun to fray at the edges, where the seasons no longer matched the sacred pattern and the rhythm of creation was already starting to drift, Enoch remained aligned. He kept the days. He honored the appointed times. He moved in step with a calendar no longer known to his generation. In the Book of Jubilees, Enoch is not the daring mystic of fantastical visions. He is not a spiritual adventurer scaling the heights of heaven. He is instead a custodian, a man who, in silence, in routine, in relentless fidelity to timing, preserved what others had already forgotten. The holy was not in what he saw, it was in what he refused to unlearn. While others sought knowledge that did not belong to them, Enoch held fast to what was entrusted, the rhythm, the order, the covenant embedded in time. This Enoch does not flash like lightning across the sky. He stands still. His life is not a spectacle, it is a steady flame, a pulse that continues even as the wider body forgets how to beat. His righteousness is not dramatic, it is deliberate, and because of that, he is preserved, not to escape, but to witness, not to be glorified, but to ensure that memory is not erased entirely. Jubilees frames Enoch as the last echo of divine tempo before the great forgetting. A man who did not need to call down fire or speak with thunder to be heard. His power was in alignment. He prayed when it was time. He rested when it was time. He taught his children the seasons not according to the moon or shifting signs, but according to the light that marked the fourth day. In a world dazzled by stars, he looked only to the day God lit the sun. And this is perhaps the truest form of resistance, not war, not rebellion, but faithfulness to time itself. In this portrayal, Enoch is not an explorer. He is an archivist, a living record, a breath that matches the breath of creation. His life is the metronome the rest of the world no longer hears, and when that rhythm faded from the earth, he was taken, not because he was too good for this world, but because the world no longer recognized his time. There is something deeply moving in this version of Enoch, a man who never shouted, but whose silence was sacred. A man who was not chosen because he was extraordinary in the ways we often idolize, but because he was consistent in the ways we often ignore. He did not ascend because he reached for the divine. He ascended because he held still while everything else drifted. And maybe that is what makes him so worthy. Not that he was the loudest or the brightest, but that he remembered. In a world that prized newness, he kept what was ancient. In a world that glorified spectacle, he chose faithfulness. In a world that forgot the holy rhythm, he became its heartbeat. Sometimes the ones who are chosen are not those who dazzle, but those who remain, who endure, who align not with trends, but with truth. Enoch was not a prophet of grand pronouncements. He was a keeper of the quiet, a guardian of sacred time. And perhaps, if you have ever felt out of sync with the world, unsure why its rhythms never quite fit your soul, perhaps it is because you are still aligned with a beat the world abandoned. Perhaps you are remembering something older than memory. Perhaps you too are a keeper, and that is not a mistake. That is a calling. You don't need to rebuild the temple. You don't need to part the sea. You don't need to ascend a mountain and hear the voice of thunder. Sometimes all that's asked of you is to keep a day. Just one day. The right day. In the right rhythm. Because the holy is not always found in miracles. Often it is hidden in memory, quiet, waiting, gentle. You may not have been there when the covenant was given. You may not fully understand every pattern, every law, every feast and command, but you can remember. You can pause. You can step out of the chaos of modern time and ask, not what the world demands of your schedule, but what the heavens are inviting you back into. One small act of remembering can realign more than you think. It is not about knowing everything. It's about not forgetting the one thing. In a world moving faster every day, a single moment of stopping, of observing a time not set by calendars but by covenant, is rebellion. Not loud, not angry, but sacred. And that's how restoration begins. Not by loud revivals or public declarations, but by one person choosing to live in rhythm again, choosing to honor a day, a season, a timing, not because of obligation, but because something deep within whispers, this is when you were meant to return. What if returning to the covenant isn't a leap of faith, but a step of memory? What if realignment doesn't begin in the heavens, but in your kitchen, in your calendar, in the moment you look up and remember, it's time, not time to achieve, time to stop, to rest, to light a candle, to listen for a silence older than language. This is not nostalgia, this is not ritualism, this is restoration through memory. When the world forgets the appointed times do not vanish. They wait, like keys waiting for someone who remembers the door they open. You don't have to unlock every gate. You only have to begin walking back, and the path will meet you. It's not about returning to an ancient lifestyle. It's about remembering the divine rhythm woven into your being. The rhythm that called the sun to shine on the fourth day, that declared rest before work, that taught celebration in harvest and reflection in atonement. These were not human inventions. They were invitations, eternal ones. So perhaps it's time to stop asking if you're ready and start asking if you're remembering. Remembering that sacredness is not always found in the spectacular, but in the synchronized. That holiness isn't always about being right, but being aligned. That you don't have to know everything to begin again. You just have to know what time it is. And now, maybe it's time to keep a day, to step back into a rhythm you never knew you missed, to breathe in sync with something older, purer, truer, because if you still remember, even faintly, then the covenant is not lost. It is alive, waiting, pulsing, and maybe, just maybe, it's been waiting for you.